She spent 4 years invisible at this company, until the day the owner showed up in disguise and everything changed. Nobody walks into a fulfillment center wearing a suit, but Logan Wright had learned very early on that people only see what they expect to see. That was why he was standing there with a fake beard, thick-rimmed glasses with no prescription, a faded t-shirt with the name Luke written on a paper badge, and the absolute certainty that nobody, not even for a second, would imagine that the man trying to assemble a cardboard box was the CEO of the company. He was right. Nobody imagined it. Wright Commerce was the third largest e-commerce operation in the Pacific Northwest. Logan knew every single number of this company by heart: revenue, margin, projection, risk. What he did not know was why the Seattle fulfillment center kept generating perfect reports, while delivery times sank week after week. Someone was doctoring the numbers, and whoever was doing it knew exactly where to hide the dirt. The obvious solution would be to send an audit team, but the one that actually worked was showing up in person, unannounced, without a tie, with a paper badge and a name that was not his own. Out of that, Luke Carter was born. A temp with no experience, carrying a resume that Mia, his assistant, had taken 40 minutes to invent, and that would not withstand any serious background check. But fulfillment centers did not check temps very closely. That was the whole point. The plan was simple: observe from the inside, identify where the numbers were being falsified, and slip out before anyone realized that Luke Carter did not exist. The plan started to fall apart in the first 5 minutes. "Do you have experience in logistics?" The woman who asked the question was not on the organizational chart he had studied. Logan mentally went through it. Supervisors, shift managers, sector coordinators. None matched this figure with her hair tied back, a clipboard in hand, and that specific look of someone who had already lost her patience before you even opened your mouth. "I have experience in..." He searched for something that sounded plausible. "Supply chain processes." She tilted her head. "Translate that into the language of people who actually work." Logan knew boardroom meetings where that phrase would have caused collective embarrassment. Here, it only embarrassed him. "I don't have experience in logistics," he admitted. "Great." She turned to the shift supervisor. "Denise, put him on packaging. Start with the basics." Her back was already turned when he tried to ask her name. He didn't ask. He made a mental note that he was going to find out. The basics, Logan began to realize in the following minutes, was a concept he had significantly underestimated. Assembling boxes seemed simple. Fold the flaps, slot the bottom, seal it with tape. Marcus, the veteran next to him, did it without looking at the rhythm of one breath per box. Logan tried to copy him. The side flap went crooked. He corrected it. The other flap popped open. He tried to hold both at the same time, and the entire box collapsed with a snap that sounded far too loud for such a minor failure. Marcus said nothing. He just watched. Logan started over. On his 9th attempt, he had something that was technically a box, but that no reasonable customer would consider a package. He was evaluating the result with more optimism than the situation deserved when the woman appeared beside him without making a sound. "What's this?" "A box," he replied. "It's upside down." "I was testing if it worked on both sides. It doesn't work." "Confirmed." Someone at the conveyor belt in the background let out a sound that wasn't exactly a cough. Denise, the supervisor, studied the ceiling with sudden interest. The woman took the box, disassembled it, and with 4 movements that Logan watched with genuine attention, reassembled it from scratch. Efficient, no wasted motion. "Like this." She pushed a fresh piece of cardboard toward him. "Now you." He tried to copy her. He got the bottom done. The side gave way. He corrected the side, and the bottom opened. The box collapsed for the 10th time with a dignity the situation did not deserve. "Luke," she said with that calm that is more unsettling than any raised voice, "you're living proof that resumes lie." Marcus finally stopped pretending he wasn't listening and let out an open laugh. Logan looked at the box, then at her, then back at the box. "Can I try again?" "You're going to try until you get it right," she replied. "Because I have 240 units to close today, and I'm not going to miss my target because of a box having an existential crisis." On his 14th attempt, Logan managed to assemble a box that stood upright without any external support. He held it for 3 seconds, just to be sure. It stayed. The problem arose when it was time to stack. The stack was 13 feet high. Logan evaluated the distance with that seriousness of someone used to making high-impact decisions and threw the box toward the top. The box hit the third row. The third row pushed the second. The second made no effort to resist. 23 boxes cascaded down with a crash that stopped all the conveyor belts simultaneously. Total silence. Logan stood in the middle of the scattered cardboard with the expression of someone recalibrating their own risk assessment in real time. She arrived before he finished his internal calculations. You've knocked down more boxes in 10 minutes than gravity has in a century. Gravity has more practice than I do. She closed her eyes for 2 seconds. Not out of anger, but out of something that was dangerously close to amusement, which she clearly was not going to let show. Stack them again, row by row, no throwing. Got it. And Luke? Yes? If we don't hit the target today, you'll be explaining to me in person why. He nodded with a seriousness that, coming from a man with a fake beard and prescriptionless glasses, hovered right on the edge between convincing and comical. The shift moved forward. Logan stacked slowly, made fewer mistakes, and observed more. And what he was observing was not the department. It was her. The woman moved through the warehouse with that presence that didn't need volume. She would appear, evaluate, correct, and move on. She knew where the belt was going to jam before it jammed. She knew which employee was reaching their limit before they asked for help. She knew the rhythm of the floor by sound, not by numbers. Logan had hired directors with MBAs from expensive universities who didn't have a tenth of that level of operational reading, and she was not on the organizational chart. He waited for the right moment and approached Marcus with a box in hand, as if to ask for technical instructions. "Who's she?" he asked in a conversational tone. Marcus didn't even have to ask who he was talking about. "Sierra Mills, General Shift Supervisor. The best this department has ever had, and the company makes sure not to notice." Logan didn't reply. He noted it down. There was half an hour left before the end of the shift when Sierra came near him for the last time that day. It wasn't to correct anything. The boxes were in order, the stacks stable. She stood still for a moment, looking at the reorganized aisle, and then turned to him with an expression that wasn't exactly approval, but was no longer that look of a supervisor evaluating a problem. "Better," she said. "I learn fast." "You learn fast, and you're starting from scratch." She tilted her head. "What kind of person does that?" Logan adjusted his glasses. The frame was thick enough to change the contour of his face. The beard covered his jaw. He knew the disguise worked because he had tested it in front of the mirror for 20 minutes while Mia laughed non-stop on the other end of the line. "The kind who needs to understand how things really work," he replied. Sierra looked at him for a second longer than necessary. "The reports for this department," she said, changing the subject in a way that didn't feel like a change at all, "don't match reality. They never have. If someone up there ever decides to pay attention, they're going to find a much bigger problem than delivery times." She turned and walked away before he could answer. Logan stood there in the middle of the aisle, a box in his hand, his fake beard slightly displaced by the heat of the shift, and a growing certainty that Sierra Mills knew much more than any report recorded. The problem was that he was also beginning to realize something else. That returning tomorrow as Luke Carter, a temp with no future, was going to be inevitable. Not just for the case, but also for her. And before we continue, leave a comment. Which city are you watching from? And at the end of the story, don't forget to give your rating from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story, everyone. Logan Wright had survived billion-dollar mergers, federal audits, and a board meeting that lasted 11 hours without a lunch break. None of that had been as physically demanding as an 8-hour shift assembling cardboard boxes. He was sitting in a coffee shop 3 blocks from Pike Place Market, with his back complaining in 3 different languages, and his fingers bearing tape marks that would probably last the week. The fake beard itched. The glasses had slipped down so much during the day that he had lost count of how many times he had pushed them back up. He ordered a coffee, a double espresso, please. Single origin beans, a 26-second extraction, temperature at 199 degrees, with a finger of structured but not aerated foam. The barista looked at him for a long moment. We have black coffee or coffee with milk. Logan blinked. Black coffee is fine. Size? The standard size. Small, medium, or large? Medium. With or without sugar? Without. Name? Luke. Luke, she repeated, writing it on the cup. You can wait over there. Logan went to wait. He was looking out the window at the light rain that had started to fall over Seattle when he heard the voice before seeing the person. Do you always order coffee like you're reading a prescription, or was today special? Sierra Mills was 2 spots behind him in line, with a damp jacket draped over her shoulders and an expression somewhere between genuine exhaustion and amusement that she was clearly trying to hide. Logan adjusted his glasses by instinct. I like specificity. You asked for the extraction temperature in a neighborhood coffee shop. It was an error in judgment. It was a show, she corrected, reaching the counter. A large black coffee, any temperature. She looked at the barista. No drama. The barista smiled with the energy of someone who had just been saved. Sierra grabbed her coffee and went to sit at a table near the window, because it was clearly the only table with an available outlet, and she had her phone charger in hand. Logan picked his up 30 seconds later, looked at the available space in the coffee shop, and evaluated his options honestly. There were 4 other tables, all occupied. The only free chair was at her table. Sierra looked at him, looked at the chair, looked at him again. Sit, she said. But don't talk about logistics, okay? Nor boxes. Deal? Nor forklifts. I wasn't even going to mention them. Yes, you were. He sat down. For maybe 2 minutes, neither of them spoke. The rain tapped against the glass. The acoustic music in the background was low enough to exist without being intrusive. The coffee was hot, and Logan could not remember the last time he had simply sat somewhere without an open agenda in front of him. It was Sierra who broke the silence. You look like a billionaire trying to pretend you're normal. Logan choked on his coffee in a way that was not elegant. Excuse me? It's the way you size up the room. She tilted her head. You looked at this coffee shop like you were calculating the square footage. I was looking for a chair. It took you 8 seconds to sit in an empty chair. 8, I counted. Logan placed his cup on the table with care. Unfortunately, I'm just weird. Sierra studied his face for a moment. The glasses, the beard, the faded t-shirt, and then shrugged like someone deciding not to pull a loose thread that might unravel the whole sweater. Why are you doing temp work? She asked. With the way you speak, you're clearly educated. I'm exploring options. Such an interview answer. I'm going through a career transition. Such a resume answer. Logan looked at her. Do you always interrogate people, or am I special? Do you always look guilty when someone asks a simple question, or is that a hobby? He opened his mouth, closed it. It was a good question to not have a quick answer for. Sierra took a sip of her coffee with the satisfaction of someone who had just won a point and knew exactly that. And you? Logan tried to redirect with what he hoped was subtlety. General shift supervisor isn't a small job. Something changed slightly in her expression. She didn't shut down. She just grew quieter. It isn't, she agreed. Marcus said you're the best this department has ever had. Marcus talks too much. He meant it as a compliment. I know how he meant it. Sierra spun the cup in her hands. The problem is, compliments don't pay the electric bill. Logan didn't reply. He waited. She continued, not because he had asked, but because sometimes the rain and the hot coffee and a stranger who doesn't know you are exactly the right space to say the truth out loud. I've been in this department for 4 years. I've covered shifts for supervisors, coordinators, and the regional manager when he took leave for 3 weeks. There was no bitterness in her tone, just the weight of someone carrying facts. My salary hasn't changed once. On paper, my title is still shift supervisor. That doesn't make sense. It makes perfect sense when you understand how the company works. She looked at the window. They know I won't leave because I need the hours. So why adjust it? Logan felt something tighten in his chest that wasn't exactly guilt, but was from the same family. Have you already taken this to HR? Twice. And? The first time they told me to document my contributions better. The second time they sent me a feedback form that had a field for me to rate my own experience from 1 to 5. Did you rate it? I put 2. She looked at him. I was being generous. Logan looked at his own coffee. He had approved that feedback system, personally, in a board meeting where everyone had agreed it was a modern and efficient solution for talent management. He did not say that. I've never met a CEO who understood what goes on down here, Sierra continued, with a tone that wasn't exactly meant for him. It was more for her own thoughts. They stay up there looking at numbers. The numbers say the department is working. The department is not working. But numbers don't lie, right? The numbers can be manipulated. She turned to him with a different kind of attention. The temp who doesn't know how to assemble a box has a well-formed opinion on data manipulation. I read a lot. About what? About how companies fail people who should be promoted. Sierra stared at him for a second. 2, 3. Then she let out a laugh. Small, real, effortless, the first since he had arrived at that coffee shop. All right, Luke. She raised her cup toward him. You're the strangest temp I've ever met. I'm honored. It wasn't a compliment. I know, I'm honored anyway. She shook her head, but the smile remained there. And Logan Wright, CEO of a $340 million company, with a fake beard, prescriptionless glasses, and tape marks on his fingers, felt that small laugh was the most honest thing he had heard in months. On the other side of the town, in an office on the 18th floor overlooking that same Pike Place market, John Cross slowly hung up the phone. The information was simple. A new temp at the fulfillment center. No verifiable history. Asking questions that temps don't ask. John stared at the window for a moment. Then he picked up the phone again and dialed a different number. Find out who Luke Carter is, he said. And do it before tomorrow. A box glued upside down doesn't destroy an operation. But a box glued upside down, in the middle of 96 delayed units, with the regional supervisor arriving in 40 minutes, and Sierra Mills already operating at her technical limit of patience, that specific box has historical potential. Logan looked at her, looked at the tape, looked at her again. I think I taped the wrong side. You think? Sierra repeated. I'm almost certain. She held the box with 2 fingers, as if handling evidence of a crime, and turned toward him with slow, very deliberate movements. This side is the bottom. This side is the lid. You taped the side. I know. The side doesn't open or close. It just exists. I understand the problem now. Excellent. She dropped the box on the counter. Because besides your packaging experiment, the tracking system has crashed for the second time this week. We're missing 96 units, and the regional supervisor is showing up here in, she looked at her watch, 38 minutes. 37. Logan corrected. The look she gave him was the kind that doesn't need words to communicate a lot. Technically, he tried, this is the most secure package I've ever made. The product isn't going anywhere. The product needing to go somewhere is the whole problem. Sierra was already at the terminal, trying the tracking system for the 3rd time. The screen froze. She pressed enter 4 times in a row with increasing energy. This system has the emotional stability of a cookie in the rain. Marcus, from the other side of the warehouse, raised his head. Do you want me to call tech support? Tech support left me on hold for 40 minutes last time and then hung up without resolving it, she replied. I prefer to solve it myself. You always prefer to solve things yourself, Marcus said in the tone of someone who has observed a pattern long enough to have a well-formed opinion on it. Because it works. Sometimes. More times than tech support. Logan approached the terminal with careful steps, like someone approaching a situation that could go very well or very badly depending on the next second. What's the error code? Sierra turned to him with an expression between skepticism and genuine curiosity. E44.6. He sat in the chair, pulled the keyboard, and began to type. Not slowly, not with hesitation, but with the specific speed of someone who knows exactly what they are looking for. Sierra stood behind him. Marcus stood behind Sierra. Both watched in silence. 43 seconds later, the system came back. The screen flickered, loaded, and the 96 units appeared on the dashboard in perfect chronological order. The silence that followed was of a different kind. How? Sierra said, with extremely controlled calm. Did you do that? I read a lot. That isn't in any normal book. I'm reading the right books. She looked at the screen, looked at him, looked at the screen again. You know what's funny? She said. If incompetence were an Olympic sport, you'd have sponsors. And yet you just resolved in 40 seconds what tech support couldn't in 40 minutes. 43 seconds. Stop counting. It's a habit. They closed the 96 units with time to spare. The regional supervisor, a man named Patterson who wore his badge like a medal, passed through the department, looked at the numbers, said good operation to the air, and left without making eye contact with anyone. Sierra watched the door close behind him with an expression Logan was learning to identify. It was her face, keeping in what she wanted to say, so she wouldn't say it in front of someone who didn't deserve to hear it. Marcus left shortly after. It was just the two of them in the warehouse, with the yellow late-shift lights and the machines powering down one by one in the background. Go ahead, Logan said. Sierra turned to him. How do you know I want to speak? You held your breath when Patterson left. She crossed her arms, leaned her weight on one side, looked at the ceiling for a second. 4 years, she said finally. 4 years covering shifts, the system, coordinators, and the regional manager. Every time something breaks, who shows up? Me. Every time we hit the target, who closed it? Me. And every time there's a promotion available, someone from the outside comes in with a pretty resume and zero floor experience. There was no sadness in her tone, just the clean indignation of someone who has calculated the bill and checked the total. You know what's worse? What? I end up training the replacement, every time, with pleasure, because the department can't stop. She pointed to the door where Patterson had left. And then that man shows up, looks at the numbers I closed, says good operation to the wall, and leaves thinking it was the system working all by itself. Logan remained quiet. Not because he had nothing to say. He had too much. Are you going to quit? He asked. No. She replied without hesitating. Because then they win. But I'm going to present the actual data from the department at the company's annual gala in 3 weeks. Every year they invite the logistics team as decorative ornaments. This year I'm showing up with numbers. She grabbed the clipboard. Whether someone listens or not, the data will be on the table. Do you think anyone will listen? She let out a short, real laugh, completely unromanticized. No, but I'm going to present it anyway. Logan looked at her, the clipboard, her jacket still on the hook, that posture of someone who doesn't bow down but carries enough weight for two, and thought that he had approved the evaluation system that ignored people like Sierra in a 40-minute meeting where the biggest debate had been about the font style of the report. He didn't say that. All right, he said instead, and held out his hand. Deal. You teach me how to work properly. I stopped turning every box into a philosophical problem. Sierra looked at his hand. And if you make a mistake again? I will, but less often. That's not a guarantee. It's the best I've got. She shook his hand, quick, practical. But she did not let go immediately. She lingered for a second, realized it, and let go. You're impossible, she said, but you still haven't given up on me. Yet, she corrected, raising a finger. Keyword. Logan walked out down the side corridor 5 minutes later with his phone in hand, already thinking about what he needed to tell Mia about the department's data, when he stopped. On the wall of the administrative corridor, there was a photo board. Company events, training sessions, the annual gala from 2 years ago. And in the bottom right corner, clear enough to leave no doubt, was Logan Wright. Clean-shaven, no glasses, smiling at the camera beside the entire board of directors. He stood there staring at his own image on the wall. The photo was there every day, 6 feet from the path Sierra walked every morning. She had not seen it yet. But all it would take was 1 day of paying close attention, a single extra second in that corridor, for Luke Carter and Logan Wright to occupy the same space in her head at the same time. And then the agreement would be worth nothing. 312 units trapped inside a broken truck 37 miles from Seattle were technically the transportation department's problem. The transportation department's problem was that the transportation department had gone to lunch and was not answering the phone, which turned the 312 units into Sierra Mills's problem, as practically everything in that department eventually did. Logan realized the scale of the crisis when he saw Sierra staring at the route map on the wall, with that specific concentration of someone who isn't seeing the map. She was seeing the solution that did not exist yet. "Do we have local delivery partners?" she asked without taking her eyes off the map. "Two," Denise replied, "but neither has the capacity for 300 units at once." "Do they have it separately?" Denise calculated with her pen in the air. "If we divide it into 3 shipments, divide it." Sierra was already on the phone. "I'll call Martinez Logistics, you call Seattle Direct." She pointed at Logan without looking. "Luke, separate the units by delivery zone. Stacks A, B, and C. Yellow labels on A, green on B, blue on C." Logan stood still for half a second. "I know the colors." "Great. Why are you still here?" He went. 90 minutes later, the last truck left the gate, 14 minutes ahead of the deadline. Sierra had coordinated 3 shipping companies simultaneously, rerouted 2 paths, and convinced Martinez Logistics to move their schedule up by promising them priority for the next 3 weeks. A promise she had no authority to make, and which she made with a confidence that rendered the question of authority completely irrelevant. Patterson did not even find out there had been a problem. When the gate closed, Sierra hung up the 3rd phone and stood looking at the empty yard. There was no relief on her face. It was that specific expression of someone who had just won a battle that nobody would record anywhere. Logan came up beside her. "You see solutions where everyone else sees problems." She turned to him. "Was that a compliment, or were you documenting?" "A compliment. She looked at the yard again. "Someone had to make up for you." "Was that an insult, or were you documenting?" The corner of her mouth twitched upward. "A compliment." Marcus left at 5, Denise at 5:10. Sierra stayed behind organizing the documentation for the 3 shipments because if she didn't, nobody would, and Logan stayed because he was monitoring the situation. At least that was what he told himself as he reorganized labels with no real necessity. When she finally turned off the computer and grabbed her jacket, he was leaning against the wall in the corridor completely by chance. "You're still here," she said. "I'm leaving now." "You're leaning against the wall." "I'm leaving while leaning against the wall." Sierra looked at him with that expression of silent calculation. "Do you want to walk down to the pier?" she asked. "It's 8 minutes away. Sometimes I go when the day has been long." It was long today. It was the longest of the week. She was already walking. "Are you coming or not?" It wasn't a question. He went. The pier at 6 in the evening in Seattle has that end-of-day light that makes everything seem slightly surreal. The bay reflecting orange and purple, the seagulls operating in considerable volume, the wind from Puget Sound asking permission from absolutely no one. Sierra walked with her hands in her pockets at the pace of someone who knows every single board on that pier. Logan walked beside her, recalibrating his center of gravity every 3 steps, without showing it externally, with partial success. "Do you come here often?" he asked. "When I need to think about something other than spreadsheets." "Does it work?" "Sometimes I end up thinking about the spreadsheet with an ocean view. It's basically the same thing with more wind." They stopped at the railing. Below, the water lapped gently against the wooden pilings. Logan looked down with an expression he had not planned on showing. "If I fall in the water, will you save me?" he asked. Sierra turned to him. "Do you know how to swim?" "No." She considered this with a seriousness disproportionate to the question. "Then maybe." "Maybe? Depends on how much patience I have." That's a very worrying criterion for an emergency situation. "Luke, I already saved you today from being blamed for the wrong labels on Stack B. My quota is at its limit." Stack B was correct. There were 3 yellow labels in the green zone. Those were cases of ambiguous addresses. An address isn't ambiguous. It's a number on a street. Logan opened his mouth to reply and stepped on a slightly loose board that tilted nearly an inch to the side. It wasn't enough to make him fall, but it was more than enough for him to grab the railing with both hands in a reaction that was significantly disproportionate to the situation. Sierra looked at his hands on the railing, looked at the board, looked at him again. The board moved nearly an inch. "I know. You grabbed the railing like the whole pier was sinking. A preventive reaction." "Yes? Are you afraid of heights?" "I'm afraid of water." "We're on a pier. I know where we are. You came to a pier with a fear of water. You invited me. I wasn't going to say no. Sierra stared at him for an entire moment and then let out the biggest laugh he had heard since arriving in Seattle. Not the suppressed chuckle of someone trying to hold back, but an open, genuine laugh that came before she could decide if she was going to let it. Logan let go of the railing with reasonable dignity. I'm glad I could help. You, she stopped to breathe, came to the pier with a fear of water and didn't say anything. It seemed important to you. She shook her head, still laughing, and turned back to the bay. Logan stood watching her profile, with the sun dropping behind the mountains and the wind shifting her hair, and thought that he had presided over meetings with views of New York, Chicago, and San Francisco, and none had been as hard to ignore as that specific view on that specific pier. The silence between them became comfortable. The kind of silence that only exists between people who have passed the point of needing to fill the air with words. It was Sierra who broke it. I'm afraid of failing, she said, without introduction, without preparation, like someone dropping something heavy on the ground because they carried it too far. Not of trying and not succeeding. I'm afraid of having done everything right for 4 years, and yet it still wasn't enough. That's different. Logan remained quiet. The wind continued. The seagulls went on with their opinions. That's different, he agreed. She turned to him. They were standing too close for a pier wide enough for 4 people. They had reached that distance without either of them having moved toward the other, which was exactly the kind of thing that happened when nobody was paying attention to the right things. Sierra realized the distance. She did not step back. Logan realized she had noticed. He did not step back. For maybe 4 seconds, the only sound was the wind and the water and the seagulls with their loud opinions about everything. Then the phone vibrated. Sierra took a step to the side. Logan turned away and answered, walking 3 steps in the opposite direction. Yes, he said quietly. The voice on the other end was direct and rapid. We have a problem. Someone inside the operation has found out there is an internal investigation underway. We don't know how the information leaked, but whoever found out is not on your side. Logan stood, staring at the darkening water. Tomorrow, he said. I'll call tomorrow. He hung up. He stood still for 2 seconds with the phone in his hand before turning back. Sierra was looking at him with that attention that saw past what people showed. Is everything okay? She asked. Everything's fine. You went pale. It's the cold wind. The wind doesn't make anyone go pale, Luke. He pocketed the phone and tried the most neutral smile in his repertoire. Private matter. It's already resolved. Sierra stared at him for a second longer than comfortable. It wasn't suspicion yet. It was that attention of hers that identified where the belt was going to jam before it jammed. All right, she said finally, turning back to the bay. But on the other side of town, in a closed office overlooking that same Puget Sound, Grace Reed carefully closed her laptop and picked up the phone. John Cross answered on the second ring. I found it, she said. And you're not going to believe what this temp is hiding. Grace Reed had the kind of smile that arrived before she entered the room. It wasn't warm. It was the smile of someone who already knows the outcome before the meeting begins and is only going through the protocol of looking surprised. Sierra saw that smile at the door of the meeting room and felt something in her stomach that wasn't exactly fear. It was recognition. The summons had arrived by email at 8:42 in the morning. Subject: Operational Review, Seattle Logistics Department. Recipient list: Sierra, Marcus, Denise, Patterson, and 4 other corporate names that Sierra did not recognize, plus Grace Reed, Regional Operations Director, whom Sierra had seen in twice in 4 years, and on both occasions had walked away from the conversation with the feeling of having signed something without reading it. Logan received the summons as well, as Luke Carter, temp, added to the bottom of the list, probably because Grace needed an audience, and the larger the better. He walked into the room 2 minutes before the scheduled time and chose the chair closest to the wall. Observation position, not participation. Sierra was already seated, her clipboard in front of her and her pen still, staring at the projector that was still turned off, with the expression of someone preparing for something that didn't have a name yet. Logan looked at her. She did not look at him. The projector turned on. Grace Reed stood with the remote control in her hand, and the first slide already said everything that needed to be said about the tone of the meeting. Operational failure analysis, 90-day period. "Thank you all for coming," she began, with that voice of someone who uses the word thank you as a tool. In the last 90 days, the Seattle Logistics Department recorded delays in 23% of shipments, 3 system failures not reported correctly, and an inventory discrepancy that reached 840 units in a single week. Silence in the room. Grace clicked to the next slide. It had Sierra Mills's name in bold in the center. General Shift Supervision, responsible for daily operational management, signed the reports that recorded these occurrences as resolved. Grace made a calculated pause. The documents say one thing, the numbers say another. Sierra stared at her own name on the projector for 2 seconds. "Can I see those documents?" she asked, with a calm that Logan recognized immediately as the precursor to something significant. "They're on the next slide. I want to see the original, not the slide version." Grace smiled the same way she had smiled at the door. Of course. She opened the folder on the table and passed a printout to Sierra. "Your signature's on page 3. Sierra turned to page 3. Looked, turned to page 1, looked again. "This report is dated a Tuesday," she said. "Correct. On the Tuesday this document refers to, I was covering the afternoon shift because the coordinator was absent. My report for that day is filed separately with a different timestamp." She placed the document on the table with precision. "This isn't my report. It has my signature on a date when I signed another document." The silence that followed was the kind that occupied physical space. Patterson looked at Grace. Grace looked at the printout. Marcus stared at the ceiling with the energy of someone praying in silence. "Operational inconsistencies," Grace continued, ignoring her with impressive skill, "are documented in multiple sources besides this specific report." "Which sources?" Sierra asked. "System logs. The system logs that crashed twice this week and were restored manually." Sierra. Patterson intervened, in the tone of someone trying to cover a tap with their palm. "I think the objective here is constructive." "The objective here," Sierra said, looking directly at Grace, "is to find a name to put under a problem that has existed for much longer than 90 days. She opened her own clipboard. "I brought the actual data from the department. Can I present it now, or would you prefer to finish your slides first?" Grace dropped her smile for the first time since she had walked into the room. "This meeting isn't your presentation, Sierra. You confuse blame with convenience," Sierra replied, with that quiet voice that cut deeper than any raised tone. "I understand. It's easier than looking for where the problem really is." Logan was looking at the table in front of him with the most neutral expression he could maintain, which was proving to be a considerable effort, because what he wanted to do was open his laptop, pull the actual files from the central server, and put them on the projector in real time. He couldn't. Not as Luke Carter. So he did the only thing he could do. He opened the notebook he always carried, which Grace had probably noticed and dismissed as attempts notes, and wrote in letters large enough for Sierra to see from her angle, without anyone else in the room being able to read. "Page 7. Timestamp date doesn't match the system." He pushed the notebook nearly an inch in her direction without looking. Sierra looked down for half a second, turned back to Grace. "Can I see page 7 of the full document?" she asked. Grace frowned. "Page 7 is only the record of timestamp date," Sierra completed. "I want to confirm that it matches the tracking system for the corresponding day." The silence this time was different. It was the silence of someone realizing the trap didn't shut the way it was supposed to. Patterson took the document, turned to page 7, looked at Grace with an expression he was clearly trying to hide. "Grace," he said slowly, "the timestamp here is from a Thursday. The report is from Tuesday," Sierra said. "Documents can be filed after the date," Grace replied, but her voice had lost a millimeter of its previous precision. "With a 2-day difference and a backdated signature?" Sierra tilted her head. "The truth is usually more organized than your spreadsheets." Marcus, who was pretending to write something down, stopped pretending completely. Logan stared at the table so he wouldn't smile. Patterson closed the document. "I think we need a more detailed review before any conclusion," he said with the energy of someone wrapping up a barbecue meeting that had started to rain. Grace, let's schedule an analysis session with legal before moving forward. Grace Reed packed up her slides with that smile that had returned, but was slightly different now, smaller, tighter, the kind that appears when someone was expecting one outcome and got another. Of course, she said. Thank you, everyone. The room emptied in 2 minutes. Sierra stayed behind to pack up her clipboard, and Logan stayed because he was putting away his notebook very slowly. When the last employee left, she turned to him. Page 7, she said. You wrote page 7 in the notebook and pushed it toward me. I was noting down random things. Luke, Sierra. Thank you, she said directly, without beating around the bush. He did not reply. He put away his notebook. She grabbed the clipboard and headed for the door, and Logan walked 2 steps behind. And that was exactly why, because he was 2 steps behind, looking at the corridor as she walked ahead, that he saw the exact moment she stopped. The photo board was there. Company events, commemorative dates, the annual gala from 2 years ago. And Sierra Mills was standing in front of it with her head slightly tilted, staring at the bottom right corner, where Logan Wright smiled at the camera, clean-shaven, no glasses, beside the entire board of directors. Logan stopped breathing for a second. Sierra stared at the photo. Then she turned slowly toward him, looked at his face, at the beard, at the glasses, looked back at the photo. She remained in silence for a time that lasted much longer than any silence that day. Luke, she said in a voice he hadn't heard before. Low. Careful. Who's this man in the photo? Sierra was looking at the photo. Logan was looking at Sierra, looking at the photo. And the entire corridor was silent, with the specific patience of someone who knows something is about to break. Who's this man in the photo? She repeated. Logan looked at the image on the wall with the expression of someone seeing for the first time something they knew very well. I think it's someone from corporate, he said. There are event photos here. He must be an executive from some department. Sierra stared at him, then at the photo, then at him again. It wasn't the answer she was looking for. But it wasn't an answer she could dismantle right there, in that corridor, with nothing more than a suspicion and a thick-rimmed pair of glasses that could be a coincidence. She said. Just that. She grabbed her clipboard and walked away down the corridor. Logan stood there for 3 seconds with the feeling that, was the most dangerous word she had said. The storm started at 5:45 without warning, like all self-respecting Seattle storms. Heavy rain, crosswinds, and the kind of lightning that makes the building's electrical system flicker twice before deciding to keep working. The problem was that Sierra was still in the warehouse at 5:45 because the reconciliation reports weren't going to organize themselves, and Logan was still in the warehouse because he was monitoring the situation. Or so he kept telling himself with decreasing conviction. Marcus had gone home at 5:20. The garage floods when it rains like this, Sierra said, looking out the window at the curtain of water outside. It's already happened 3 times. The cars get stuck until the pump drains it, which takes an hour and a half on average. You're telling me we're trapped here. I'm saying my car is in the garage and I'm in no hurry to swim to it. Logan looked out the window. The rain beat against the glass with that determination of someone who had planned it. Is there coffee? He asked. The machine in the hallway works sometimes. Percentage, 60%. I'll try. He went. He returned 4 minutes later with 2 cups, the expression of someone who had won something, and his jacket slightly wet from the 20-foot distance to the machine, which said things about the intensity of the rain coming in through the side door. Sierra looked at the cups, looked at the wet jacket. You went to get coffee in the rain. The machine's right next to the door. There's a roof. The roof has a hole. Luke, the coffee was worth it. She took the cup, took a sip, closed her eyes for a second. It's horrible. A 60% chance of working doesn't include quality. Why did you go get it if you knew that? Because you needed a reason to stop working for 5 minutes. Sierra stood looking at him with that calculating expression he knew, but there was something different in it now. Less evaluation, more attention. The kind of attention that appears when someone begins to realize they are looking at one thing and seeing another. She looked away first. They stayed in the warehouse break room with the rain on the windows and the city glowing in the distance through the wet glass. The light was that soft, end-of-days storm light that makes everything seem closer than it is. "You talked about loneliness earlier today," Sierra said, without introduction. "I didn't talk about loneliness earlier today. Not with that word." She spun the cup in her hands. "But when Patterson said he was going to wrap up the meeting, you looked out the window with an expression I recognize." "What expression?" "Of someone who's used to solving problems alone and thinks it's the only option." Logan remained quiet. "It's not judgment," she said. "I do the same thing. I know." "How do you know?" "Because you thanked me for the notebook 2 seconds after it happened and didn't mention it again." He looked at her. "You don't like owing anything to anyone." Sierra opened her mouth, closed it. "That's unsettlingly accurate for someone who spends the day putting tape in the wrong place." "I'm a complex person." "That's a generous description." Logan smiled. She almost smiled back, but the horrible coffee got in the way. The silence that followed was different from the other silences they had shared. It wasn't the silence of two coworkers waiting for the rain to pass. It was the silence of two people who know they are having a different conversation than the one they are having. "Why are you alone?" she asked, direct as always. "Who says I am? Nobody calls you at work. You don't mention anyone. When your phone rings, you turn your back. Maybe I'm private. You're not private. You're careful." She tilted her head. "There's a difference." Logan looked at his cup for a moment. "When you spend a lot of time making decisions for a lot of people," he said slowly, "you start to think you can't afford to be a variable in someone else's equation." Sierra remained silent. "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard said with a completely calm voice," she said. "It's not sad. It's practical. It's both." He turned to her. She was looking at him with that attention that saw beyond what people showed, and this time he had no notebook to push and no system to fix to distract them. "You make me forget who I am," he said. It came out before he could decide if he was going to say it. Sierra did not look away. "Maybe that's the problem," she replied, quietly. "Or the solution. I don't know which one yet." The rain continued. The city glowed through the glass, and the distance between them was the smallest it had been since the first day in the warehouse. Not because either of them had moved, but because the space had shrunk all by itself while they weren't paying attention. "Are you nervous?" she asked. "Very." The corner of her mouth rose. "Great," she said. "Now we're even." Logan looked at her eyes first, then at her mouth, and it was a look that had nothing ambiguous about it. And she clearly received it because she stopped breathing for exactly 2 seconds. He leaned slightly toward her. She did not step back. The rain beat harder against the window for a moment, as if the Seattle weather had an opinion on the matter and wanted to register it. Logan's phone vibrated on the table between them with the energy of a timer hitting 0. Neither of them moved for a second. It vibrated again. Logan closed his eyes briefly, picked up the phone, looked at the screen. Office of the President. Richard Hale. It wasn't the kind of call that could go to voicemail. "I need to take this," he said. "I know," she replied. He stood up and went into the corridor, and Sierra sat staring at the cup of horrible coffee with the expression of someone internally reorganizing what had almost happened. Outside, Logan answered with the most controlled voice he could muster in 3 seconds. "Richard, we have a serious problem." The voice on the other end was tense, direct. "John Cross presented a formal restructuring proposal for the Seattle logistics sector to the board this afternoon. It closes the center, transfers operations to Portland." Logan stood in the corridor with the rain beating on the window in the background. "Does he have the votes?" "He has 4. You need 6 to block it." And Logan, he put Sierra Mills's name down as the primary party responsible for the operational failures that justify the closure. From the other side of the corridor, through the half-open door, Logan could see Sierra still sitting with the cup in her hand, staring at the rain outside. And John Cross, at that exact moment, was 3 floors above that very building in Seattle, opening an envelope Grace Reed had left on his desk. Inside the envelope was a single sheet with a single piece of information. The real name of Luke Carter. Grace Reed's envelope had been on John Cross's desk for 12 hours. The name inside it had been in John Cross's head for 11 hours and 50 minutes. The plan John was developing based on that name was being hindered by the fact that John Cross, deep down, was afraid of CEOs. Especially this CEO. So he did what any mid-career executive does when they don't know what to do. He called a meeting to discuss the situation without resolving anything. In the warehouse, oblivious to the fact that John Cross was 3 floors above them, with the right name and the wrong plan, Sierra Mills and Luke Carter were having a conversation that started with logistics and was turning into something else without either of them having planned it. It had all started because Sierra found a number that didn't close. It wasn't a large number. It was a $340 difference in an internal inventory transfer report. The kind of thing that went unnoticed in any quick audit because it was too small to be intentional and too large to be a typo. Sierra stared at that number for 2 minutes. Then she went to look for the previous month's report. She found $380, a different discrepancy, the same pattern. She went to find Logan. Luke. He was organizing labels on the other side of the warehouse with a concentration that suggested he was thinking about something else entirely. Huh? Come see something. They stood side by side in front of the computer, the blue light of the screen illuminating both of them in the nearly empty warehouse, the rain tapping on the windows outside, and Sierra pointing at columns of numbers with her pen while Logan followed with attention that, this time, he didn't have to fake. Here, she said, 340. Here, she turned the page, 380. Here she opened another file, 290. Never the same amount, he said. Never the same amount, but always in the same transfer category, always on the last day of the closing cycle. When nobody's reviewing with attention, when everyone's in a hurry to close the month. She leaned back in her chair. People who lie too much always forget some lie. Logan stared at the screen. You need to track the destination account of those transfers. Sierra turned to him with that expression of silent calculation. How does a temp who didn't know how to close a box last week know what a destination account for a bookkeeping transfer is? I said I read a lot. You read a lot about corporate accounting. I read about everything. Luke, Sierra. She stared at him for a second. Then she turned to the computer. I don't have access to the financial system, only the operational one. If you show me where the integrated report server is, he said with a very calculated casualness, I can try to find a way to cross-reference the data. You know how to access the integrated report server? Maybe. You definitely watch too many movies for someone who doesn't know how to close a box. The boxes have improved a lot. One improved. The others are still a challenge for humanity. He pulled the keyboard toward him. She let him. What happened in the following 40 minutes was, depending on the angle, a discreet corporate investigation or the most improvised show that warehouse had seen since the crisis of the 96 units. Logan found server access in 8 minutes. Sierra stood lookout at the door of the corridor because she had seen this scene somewhere and thought that was how it worked. Is anyone coming? He asked, without taking his eyes off the screen. No. Can you close the door? If I close the door, I can't see the corridor. That's the goal. The goal of a lookout is to see the corridor, Luke. The goal is that nobody sees what we're doing. If I close the door and someone opens it from the outside, it'll make noise and we'll have more reaction time than if the door is open. Logan stopped typing for 2 seconds. That makes sense. I know. She closed the door, came back behind him. Did you find anything? I'm cross-referencing the values with the supplier registry. He pointed at the screen. Each transfer goes to a different supplier in the system. But look at the FEIN. What? The Federal Employer Identification Number for each supplier. He pointed. This one here? And this one. And this one. Sierra leaned toward the screen. The numbers were different, but the last 2 digits of each were always the same. They're the same company, she said. They're the same company with 3 different names in the supplier registry. Silence. How much do these transfers add up to in total? She asked. Logan calculated on the screen. In the last 18 months, he said, $432,000. Sierra stared at the number for a considerable time. All right, she said, with that calm that preceded something. This is a bigger problem than I imagined. Yes, much bigger. Yes, we have to take this to human resources. No, she turned to him. Why not? Because we still don't know who registered these suppliers. If it's someone in HR, you're handing the investigation directly over to the people who are investigating you. So who do we take it to? Logan fell silent for a second. Let me think. You're making that spy movie face again. I'm not making any face. Your eyes are slightly squinted and your hand is on your chin. I'm thinking. Do you think with your hand on your chin? Everyone thinks with their hand on their chin. I think with my pen. She showed the pen. It's more practical. The truth doesn't make noise, he said, ignoring the pen with dignity. It waits. We need 1 more week of data before presenting anything. 1 week. To have the complete closing cycle pattern. With 1 more month of evidence, nobody can dispute it. Sierra stared at him. At his chin. At his hand on his chin. At his chin again. All right, she said. 1 week. But you stop making the investigator face because it's embarrassing for both of us. I wasn't. Yes, hand on chin. He lowered his hand. They left the warehouse 40 minutes later, separated by 3 minutes, as if that would make any difference. Which it probably didn't, because Denise had seen them walk in together and had the expression of someone who saw and was saving the information for the right moment. Logan walked to the parking lot with his phone in hand, already planning the call to Richard Hale, when he realized Sierra was still in the corridor behind him, standing, staring at her own phone with an expression he didn't recognize. Sierra? She turned the phone toward him. It was a message. Unknown number. No name. 5 words. Stop investigating. Logan stared at the screen for a moment. Then he looked at the surrounding corridor. The lights, the doors, the photo board in the background, and had the specific feeling that at least one of the people who had sent that message was much closer than they should be. Sierra was not the kind of person who lost sleep over numbers. Numbers were work, and work she could solve. But $432,000 distributed over 18 months to 3 companies that were actually won. That wasn't a number. It was an architecture. Someone had planned that with calm and care and enough time to leave no obvious trace. And someone knew she was looking. She opened her laptop at 11 at night with the intention of reviewing the files 1 more time. She ended up searching for the name Right Commerce in public corporate registries, because when you find fraud inside a company, the next instinct is to understand who really runs that company. The first photo that appeared was from an article 2 years ago. Right Commerce announces expansion to the Pacific Northwest. Logan Wright, CEO, at the grand opening of the Seattle Fulfillment Center, smiling at the camera with that specific confidence of someone accustomed to being photographed. Sierra stared at that photo for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and sent a message. I need to talk to you tomorrow. Rooftop of the building, 6 in the evening. Luke replied in 40 seconds. Is everything okay? She stared at the question for a moment. I don't know yet. The rooftop of the fulfillment center was technically a maintenance area with a view, which meant it had an excellent view of the Seattle Bay and no chairs. Sierra was leaning against the railing when Logan arrived, with the city glowing below and the cold night wind doing its job without asking anyone's permission. He arrived on time. She noticed. You always arrive at the exact time, she said without turning. Habit. Booze. And organized persons. Huh. She stood facing the city for another 2 seconds, then she turned. I found a corporate article last night. Right Commerce, 2 years ago, the opening of this center. Logan remained quiet. There's a photo, she continued. The CEO of the company, Logan Wright. She crossed her arms. Do you want to explain to me why the CEO of Right Commerce has the exact same jawline as you, Luke? The wind blew between them. Logan took off his glasses. Then, with a slowness that wasn't hesitation, but was close to it, he ran his hand down his chin and removed the fake beard. Sierra stared at the face that was in the photo. At the face in front of her. At the photo again, which was on the phone in her hand. Hi, he said. She remained silent for a considerable time. You, she said finally in that low, careful voice that was scarier than any raised tone, are the owner of this company. I'm the CEO. You're the owner of this company and you stayed here for 2 weeks pretending to be a temp who didn't know how to close a box. The temp part was a disguise. The box part was real. "Luke," she said, and then stopped. "That's not even your name." Logan Wright." Sierra looked at the railing, at the city, at him. "Logan Wright," she repeated, as if testing the weight of the name. "The man who approved the feedback system that sent me a form from 1 to 5 when I asked for a promotion." Logan opened his mouth. "You approved that system," she said before he could speak. "Yes. Personally. Yes. In which meeting?" "Sierra? In which meeting, Logan?" He fell silent. "In a 40-minute meeting," he said, "where the biggest debate was about the font style of the report." Sierra let out a laugh that had no humor in it. "How wonderful," she said. "My entire career decided at the speed of a report font. I didn't know that there were real people on the other side of that form." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. It's easier when it's just numbers, right? When it's metrics and indicators and reports that don't match reality because nobody went down there to see reality. "That's exactly why I went down to see it," he said. "Disguised. Because disguised is the only way to see the truth. Any CEO who shows up in a suit at a fulfillment center sees what people want him to see." "So you lied to see the truth." "Yes. And am I part of that truth?" The question hung in the air between them with the cold wind. "You're part of what I found," he said, carefully. "But what happened between us isn't part of any plan." "How do I know that?" "Because I'm here, clean-shaven, no glasses, telling you the truth when I could have just not answered your message." Sierra stared at him. "Luke," she said, and then corrected herself with an expression that was weariness and irony at the same time. "Logan, you're still the worst temp in the history of Seattle. That one still hurts." "It was meant to." He did not answer. The wind passed again. "Broken trust doesn't seal with adhesive tape," she said, more quietly. "You know that." "I do. I fell in love with you." The words came out direct, without romanticism, the way she said everything that mattered. "Not with your edited version. With the man who got coffee in the rain and almost fell on the pier and wrote page 7 in the notebook when I needed it." "Does that man exist?" "That's me. That man also owns a company that doesn't know I exist. That man is trying to change that." "Trying isn't changed." She opened her bag and took out the badge. The paper one, with the name Luke printed in a simple font, which had been left forgotten on the warehouse counter 2 days before, and which she had kept without knowing why. She placed it in his hand. "I need a few days," she said. "Sierra, I'm not asking for permission." She grabbed her bag. "I'm telling you how it's going to be." She walked to the rooftop door, stopped with her hand on the knob. "The data we found," she said without turning, "it's real. Someone has been stealing from this company for 18 months. That doesn't change because of the rest." "I know. Take care of it." She opened the door and left. Logan was left alone on the rooftop with the paper badge in his hand, the city glowing below, and the cold wind making the kind of comments the wind makes when you deserve it. He had presided over the company for 7 years. He had made decisions that moved hundreds of millions of dollars. He had entered that fulfillment center in disguise, absolutely certain that he controlled every variable of the plan. He had never calculated Sierra Mills as a variable. And now she was the only thing that mattered, and he had absolutely no plan. 3 floors below, in a room with the lights on late, John Cross opened the email Grace Reed had sent at 6 in the evening with the subject confirmed and a single attachment. It was a system access report. Date, time, terminal used. And the username that had accessed the integrated report server 2 days prior. John Cross stood staring at that name for a moment. Then he smiled for the first time in days. Because the infiltrator hadn't been careful enough. And now John Cross knew exactly where, when, and how to make the next move. Logan Wright had an apartment in Seattle. He had an assistant who organized every minute of his schedule. He had a company with $340 million in annual revenue and a board that expected decisions from him every Monday morning at 9. He was standing in front of the bathroom mirror at 7 in the morning with a paper badge in his hand and zero plan. Mia called at 7:05. "Good morning," she said, with that energy of someone who has already had coffee twice. "You have a meeting with legal at 10, lunch with Richard Hale at noon, and cancel everything." Silence. "Everything?" "Everything." Logan, you have a meeting with legal about a $400,000 fraud. Reschedule it for tomorrow. And the lunch with Richard? Send a message saying I'm resolving something important. That's exactly what you said when you disappeared for 2 weeks with a fake beard. Mia, yes? Cancel everything. She canceled everything, with the silent energy of someone who deeply disagreed, but had learned when it wasn't worth arguing. Gasworks Park at 9 in the morning in Seattle was the kind of place that existed in the gap between the city and the calm, the rusted structures of the old gas plant in the background, Lake Union in front, the cloudy sky doing what the Seattle sky does most of the year. Logan knew Sierra came here on her mornings off because she had mentioned at the pier 2 weeks before that she had places to think, and this was one of them. It was her day off. It was a gamble. He arrived and stood at the park entrance for 30 seconds, evaluating if the gamble was a good one. Then he saw her sitting on a bench near the edge of the lake with a coffee in her hand, staring at the water, and the bet paid off. He walked toward her at the pace of someone who had rehearsed what he was going to say and threw the rehearsal away halfway there. Sierra heard the footsteps, turned, and stood looking at him for a moment. "You're clean-shaven," she said. "I am." "And no glasses." "That too." She looked at his face with clinical attention, the way she evaluated a conveyor belt that was running suspiciously. "You look better without the beard." Logan felt something relax in his chest. "Thank you. You're still bad with boxes." That was quick. "I was holding it in." He pointed to the space on the bench next to her. "May I?" Sierra looked at the space, looked at him, looked at the lake. "Since you came all this way," she said, which wasn't a yes but wasn't a no either, and Logan knew Sierra Mills well enough to know it was the best answer he was going to get in the next 2 minutes. He sat down. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The lake was quiet. In the distance, Seattle made the low, constant hum of a city that never completely stops. A seagull landed 10 feet from them, evaluated the situation, and flew away, which Logan thought was a comment. "I hid my name," he said. "Not what I felt." Sierra took a sip of her coffee. "That's a very well-constructed phrase to be spontaneous." "I rehearsed it in the car." "How long?" 20 minutes. And that was the best that came out in 20 minutes. There were worse versions. For example? One started with technically. Sierra closed her eyes for 2 seconds. "Logan, Sierra. Do you understand why I'm angry?" "I do." "Explain it to me then, just to be sure." He turned to her. "You spent 4 years building trust in a place where people didn't see you properly. I showed up as someone different from who I am, gained that trust, and when you found out, it felt once again like someone was using you without telling you the cost." Sierra stared at the lake. "That wasn't far off," she said at last. "It wasn't. But, there is no but, it was wrong." He paused. "The only thing that wasn't wrong was the rest. The rest is a very broad category. The coffee in the rain, the pier." Page 7. He looked at her. "You." Sierra spun the cup in her hands. It was the movement she made when she was processing something she didn't want to process out loud. "The problem was never who you were," she said at last. "It was what you chose to hide. I know. Knowing doesn't undo it. It doesn't. But I can stop hiding from now on. From now on, you're going to show up in a suit. Probably. And I'll be an employee at your company. Technically, you always were." "Logan, sorry, bad reflex." She looked at him with that expression that wasn't forgiveness but was in the same neighborhood. "Why did you come here before dealing with the company?" she asked. "John Cross has evidence against you. You have a meeting with legal that you canceled. You have a board waiting. Why here first?" Logan fell silent for a moment. "Because I know how to fix the company," he said. I'm not so sure." Sierra looked at him, at the lake, at him again. "That was better than the first line." "I didn't rehearse that one." "I know. That's why it was better." The silence that returned was different from the previous ones. It wasn't distance. It was the silence of two people who hadn't resolved everything yet, but had stopped pretending there was nothing to resolve. "There's a gala," Logan said. "The company one, in a week." "I know. I was going to present the department data. You can still present it. As an employee who uncovered internal fraud, or as the CEO's guest, as the most competent person that department has ever had." He looked at her. "And as my date, if you want." Sierra stared at him for a time. Logan did not try to fill. I haven't forgiven you, she said. I know. I need more time. All right. But, she raised a finger, if you show up at the gala and don't know the name of a single employee from the department whose hand you're going to shake, I'm going home immediately. I know all of their names. Marcus? Marcus Reeves. 10 years with the company, conveyor belt operations specialist, roots for the Seattle Sounders, and keeps chocolate in the third drawer of the workbench. Denise DePark, shift supervisor, 4 years, organized the color-coded label system that the entire department uses today and didn't get credit for it. Silence. You researched. I observed. He looked at her. That's what happens when you stop looking at reports and start looking at people. Sierra was silent for a moment. Then she stood up, grabbed her coffee, and walked 2 steps toward the lake. I'll think about the gala, she said, with her back turned. All right, and Logan? Yes? If you show up there with a fake beard, I'm going to fire you myself, even without the authority to do it. He let out a real laugh, the first since the rooftop, and Sierra kept looking at the lake, but her shoulder relaxed nearly 1/4 of an inch. The kind of thing you only notice when you're paying very close attention. Logan left the park with his phone in hand and called Mia. Reschedule legal for this afternoon, he said. What time? As soon as possible. And Mia, he stopped on the sidewalk. I need the complete supplier registry files for the last 24 months. All of them. Can I ask why? Because someone has been stealing from this company for 18 months, and I know exactly where the proof is. Mia was silent for 2 seconds. I knew the fake beard would lead to something, she said. He hung up. That was when the phone vibrated with a message from a number he didn't recognize, but the message was direct enough to need no introduction. Mr. Wright, my name is Daniel Okafor. I worked in the finance department of Wright Commerce until 3 months ago. I was fired after questioning certain transfers. I have documents. I have everything. Call me. Logan stood still on the sidewalk with the cold Seattle wind doing its job. Daniel Okafor had what was missing. And John Cross probably knew it too. The annual Wright Commerce Gala had the kind of decoration that cost enough to remodel half of the Seattle Fulfillment Center, and which nobody in the hall would mention out loud, because they had all signed off on the budget without blinking. Golden chandeliers, tables with flowers that had French names, and a sound system that played jazz soft enough to sound sophisticated and loud enough to cover inconvenient conversations. John Cross had arrived 40 minutes before the scheduled time. He was in the corner of the hall with a glass in hand and the smile of someone who is about to win something they had planned for a long time. Grace Reed was 3 tables ahead of him with the same smile. They didn't need to speak. They had already arranged everything. Sierra arrived at 8 o'clock sharp in a blue dress she had bought at a sale 2 years ago, which looked better than anything in the hall because she wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was trying to survive the night with her dignity intact and leave before 10. Marcus appeared beside her 30 seconds later out of nowhere. You're here, he said with the energy of someone who wasn't expecting it. I said I was coming. You said you'd think about it. I thought about it and came. Marcus looked at her, looked at the room, looked at her again. He's here, Marcus said quietly. I know, in a suit. It's a very good suit. Marcus, I'm just letting you know. You're making unnecessary comments about clothes. I'm contextualizing the environment. He grabbed 2 cups of water from a passing tray. Here, you'll need hydration. Why? Because the night looks like a long one. Sierra took the cup, took a sip, stared at the entire hall with the expression of someone evaluating the geometry of a situation that hadn't finished forming yet. On the other side of the room, Logan Wright was in a gray suit, clean-shaven, no glasses, talking to Richard Hale with the concentration of someone who is listening but thinking of something else. When Sierra walked in, he didn't turn immediately. He turned 30 seconds later, as if he had waited for the right moment. The eyes of the two met across the distance of the entire room. Sierra looked away first. Logan stared for a second longer and turned back to Richard Hale, who was clearly used to being ignored in favor of other priorities. John Cross took the stage at 8:30 with the microphone and the posture of someone who had rehearsed their speech in the mirror at least 4 times. Good evening, everyone, he began, with that executive voice learned in a public speaking course. "It's an honor to be here representing the operations team of Right Commerce in a year of so many achievements and challenges overcome." Sierra, from the table she shared with Marcus and Denise, looked at the clipboard she had brought in her bag. Department data, organized by category, with 3 months of clean evidence. She had planned to ask for the floor after the opening speech. She hadn't planned for what happened next. "This year," John continued, "we identified significant operational vulnerabilities in some units. Vulnerabilities that cost the company time, resources, and reputation." He made a calculated pause. "We are taking steps to ensure that responsibilities are assigned correctly." Grace Reed, from her table, slightly tilted her head in Sierra's direction. Sierra understood the movement. It was for her. She opened her mouth to stand up, and Logan Wright got there first. He did not run. He did not raise his voice. He simply stood up from the front table, walked to the stage with the specific tranquility of someone who knows the entire room will follow every step, and stopped beside John Cross with a cordial smile that was anything but cordial. "Thank you, John," he said, taking the microphone with a smoothness that left no room for resistance. "I'll take it from here." John Cross stood beside him with a frozen smile on his face. He didn't leave the stage because leaving would be worse than staying. He stayed because he had no better choice in 2 seconds. Logan looked at the room. "Some men build companies," he said. "Others try to steal them." The jazz stopped, not literally, but it felt like it. In the last 18 months, $432,000 were transferred from this company to 3 suppliers registered in the system under different names and the same federal employer identification number. He paused. It was not a system error. It was not an operational failure. It was a decision made by someone with access to the supplier registry and the monthly closing cycle. Grace Reed from her table grabbed her bag. Logan looked directly at her. "Mrs. Reed," he said, with a politeness that was more intimidating than any raised tone, "I wouldn't recommend leaving right now. The representative from the King County District Attorney's office is near the door." He arrived at 8:15. Grace Reed placed her bag back on the chair. Logan returned to the center of the stage. Daniel Okafor worked in the finance department of this company for 6 years. He was fired 3 months ago after questioning transfers that didn't make sense. "Daniel, can you stand up?" On the right side of the room, a man in his early 40s, wearing a discreet suit, stood up with the posture of someone who had waited for this moment and didn't know if he would believe it when it arrived. The room fell silent. Daniel delivered documents to legal this morning that include the destination bank account number of the transfers, the internal approval emails, and the identity of whoever authorized the registration of the ghost suppliers. Logan looked at John Cross. "Account ending in 8732. Do you want to comment, John?" John Cross's face was the color of the white napkin on the table in front of him. He began. "You don't need to," Logan said. "Legal already has enough." He looked at the room. Lies rise quickly, the truth goes further. Sometimes it arrives dressed in a suit at a gala with golden chandeliers, but it arrives. Someone at the third table let out a nervous laugh. Then another person. The entire room didn't quite know what they were feeling, which is exactly the ideal state for a well-executed corporate revelation. Logan continued. "You investigated every employee in this center, John. You sent reports, called meetings, tried to assign responsibility to people who had nothing to do with what you were doing." He slightly tilted his head. "You investigated every employee except the only one who signed your paycheck." John Cross looked at the exit, looked at the district attorney's representative near the door, looked at Logan. He sat down. The room took 2 minutes to breathe normally again. Marcus, from the table with Sierra, had the expression of someone who had just watched something they would tell for the rest of their lives. "I told you the night looked long," he said. "You said I'd need hydration," Sierra replied. "I was right about both." Denise, beside them, was staring at the stage with wide eyes. "He was here all week as Luke," she said, more to herself than to anyone. "Assembling boxes, upside down. The boxes improved at the end," Marcus said. "One improved. One is progress." Sierra was looking at the stage where Logan still was, talking to Richard Hale and two men in suits who had the specific look of lawyers in work mode. He wasn't looking at her. Then he looked. And this time, neither of them looked away. Logan took the microphone back. Before wrapping up, he said to the hall, "I want to recognize someone who identified the first inconsistencies in this data before any formal audit, who has worked in this center for 4 years with a level of operational competence that no report adequately captured." He looked directly at her table. "Sierra Mills. Can you come to the stage?" Marcus gave her shoulder a gentle nudge. Sierra looked at him. "Go," he said. "I didn't rehearse anything. You never rehearse. That's what works." She placed her clipboard on the table, adjusted the blue dress from the sale 2 years ago, and walked to the stage with the posture of someone who didn't need a rehearsal, because she had spent 4 years preparing for that without knowing this was the moment. Logan held the microphone toward her. She looked at him. At the microphone. At the entire room, looking at her. "I brought the department data," she said to the microphone, to the room, to nobody in particular and to everyone at the same time. "If anyone is interested in seeing how an operation actually works from the inside, I have 3 months of organized evidence here." She raised the clipboard. Someone applauded, then someone else. The entire room had no choice but to follow, because when someone walks onto a stage with a clipboard at a gala with golden chandeliers and speaks in that voice, you either applaud or admit you didn't understand what was happening. Logan stood beside her without taking the microphone back. Low enough for only her to hear, he said, "You came. I came to see the data presented." "Just that?" She looked at the room, at the clipboard, at him. "I'm still deciding on the rest," she said. But she stayed on the stage, and that, Logan Wright knew, was more than any 20-minute rehearsal had managed to plan. Sierra Mills had presented operational data to Patterson twice, to Human Resources once, and to a meeting room that didn't want to listen. She had never presented to 400 people in a hall with golden chandeliers. The clipboard helped. When in doubt, hold the clipboard. "The numbers for the Seattle Logistics Department," she began, with that voice she used when the system crashed and she needed to solve it before a collapse, "show a 38% reduction in delivery delays over the last 90 days. Not because the system improved, because the people who operate that system found solutions that no report recorded." The room was quiet. Not the embarrassing silence of the meeting with Grace Reed. It was the silence of people who are actually listening. Marcus Reeves reorganized the conveyor belt flow 3 times in 6 months without receiving instructions to do so. Denise Park created the color-coded label system that the entire department uses today, and she doesn't have her name anywhere in the files. She looked at the clipboard, then at the room. These people don't appear in the reports that reach corporate. They appear in the results that corporate celebrates without knowing where they came from. Marcus, from his table, was looking at his own shoe with the posture of someone trying not to show they were moved and failing considerably. Denise had stopped breathing. Logan stood beside Sierra on the stage, 2 steps away, without a microphone, without interruption, just listening. "I brought this data to this gala every year," Sierra continued. "Every year I was table decor. This year someone finally turned on the light." She lowered the clipboard. The applause started at Daniel Okafor's table, then the 5th. Then the entire hall. Not the polite applause of a corporate event, but the kind that happens when an entire room recognizes something true at the same time. Marcus was on his feet before anyone else. Denise beside him. Richard Hale, who had seen many galas, stood and applauded with the expression of someone happy to have canceled their own plans to be there. Sierra stood looking at the room with the clipboard in her hand and the expression of someone who had spent 4 years waiting for a moment and didn't know what to do with their body when the moment arrived. Logan took a step closer. "Breathe," he said quietly. "I'm breathing." "You're holding the clipboard like a shield." "It is a shield. You can lower it now." She lowered it. Nearly a quarter of an inch. Logan took the microphone when the applause subsided. "She taught me more about leadership than any MBA," he said, to the hall. "And I know this because I spent 2 weeks by her side trying to assemble cardboard boxes." Someone laughed. then someone else. I was terrible, he continued, with that honesty the room clearly didn't expect from a CEO with a golden chandelier in the background. One box was upside down. An entire stack fell. The tracking system crashed, and I fixed it in 43 seconds because it was the only thing I knew how to do right in that warehouse. He looked at Sierra. Everything else she did better than I ever would. Sierra crossed her arms. You're still the worst temp in the history of Seattle, she said, to the microphone, to the room, to him. And you're still the boss. The hall laughed for real, out loud, the kind that happens when humor comes from something completely genuine. Logan pulled something from the inside pocket of his suit. It was a small photo frame made of simple metal. Inside, framed with the seriousness the situation didn't deserve and yet completely deserved, was the paper badge with the name Luke printed in a simple font. Sierra looked at the frame. You framed the badge. You returned it. I framed it. Why? Because it was the first honest thing that passed between us. He held it out to her. You gave me back Luke, I give you back Logan. The hall grew quiet in a different way. It wasn't corporate attention. It was the attention of 400 people realizing they were watching something that wasn't on the program. Sierra looked at the frame, at him, at the entire hall looking at her. This is embarrassing, she said into the microphone that was still on. I know, he replied. There are 400 people watching. I know. You planned this. Since Gasworks Park. That was yesterday. I planned quickly. She took the frame, looked at the badge inside it, the same badge she had placed in his hand on the rooftop with the certainty that she was closing a chapter. I went to Seattle looking for a problem, Logan said to her, to the microphone, to the hall that had practically ceased to exist because it was just the two of them on stage and the rest was background. I found my future. Sierra stared at him. That was the most rehearsed line of the night. It was the truest one, too. It can be both. It can. The silence lasted exactly the right amount of time. I didn't forgive you all at once, she said, just to him, not into the microphone. I forgave you bit by bit. The coffee in the rain. Page 7, Gasworks Park. She looked at the frame. And this? Does this close it? She looked up at him. This closes it, she said. Logan stared at her for a second, too. The hall was in total silence. He took a step toward her. She did not retreat. She stood there with the frame in her hand, and that look he had learned to read as the most honest sign she had. He leaned in. She met him halfway. The kiss lasted exactly the right amount of time. Not too quick to seem weightless, not too long to become a show, though the entire hall had already understood it was exactly that. Marcus was on his feet before anyone else. Again. The applause returned with double the volume, and this time Denise was laughing as she applauded, and Richard Hale had the expression of someone who would tell this story for the rest of their career. Sierra stepped back nearly half an inch, looked at him, at the hall, at the frame still in her hand. You knew I'd forgive you, she said. I hoped. There's a difference. I hoped a lot. She shook her head, but the smile arrived before she could decide if she was going to let it. The real, open, effortless smile. The same one that had appeared for the first time in a coffee shop near Pike Place Market with horrible coffee and rain on the window. Logan saw it. Kept it. Some things are worth 2 weeks of a fake beard, 43 seconds fixing the system, and 23 cascaded boxes. This was worth all of that, and a little more. 6 months later, John Cross and Grace Reed were facing charges of corporate fraud in King County Court. Daniel Okafor returned to the company with a new title, a room with a window, and the specific satisfaction of someone who waited for the right moment and didn't waste it. Marcus became a senior operations specialist. Denise became shift manager with formal credit for the label system registered in the company history. Patterson was transferred to Portland, where he was very happy saying good operation to other walls. The Wright Commerce Innovation Center opened on a sunny Thursday morning, which in Seattle was enough of an event to be recorded in the minutes. Sierra led the scholarship and training program for employees with a clipboard in hand, total autonomy, a real budget, and zero corporate interference, exactly as she had demanded in the board meeting. At the opening ceremony, Logan tried to assemble a cardboard box live for demonstration. The box ended up upside down. Sierra turned to the 80 people present with the most serious expression she could maintain. "See?" she said. "Some things even billions can't fix." Logan looked at the box, at her, at the box again. The right flap gave way. The right flap always gives way with you. It's a matter of angle. It's a matter of 6 months and zero progress. He dropped the adhesive tape on the workbench with considerable dignity and took her hand. Outside, the 80 new employees walked into the glass building with bags and phones, and that expression of someone who doesn't know yet what they will find but has decided they will find it anyway. Sierra watched each of them enter. Logan stood beside her, watching Sierra watch. Some things even billions can't buy. This one was free. And so ended the story of the millionaire CEO who walked into that company looking for numbers that didn't close, and ended up finding something much rarer. Logan Wright went to Seattle to investigate a fraud. But the greatest discovery was not hidden in spreadsheets, reports, or servers. It was walking the corridors of that company every single day. For 4 years, Sierra Mills did the work of people who made more, held higher titles, and received all the recognition. Even so, she kept showing up, she kept helping, she kept doing the right thing. And maybe that's the most beautiful part of all. Because sometimes life seems unfair. Sometimes it feels like nobody sees the effort, the sacrifices, or all the things we do in silence. But a person's value doesn't decrease just because nobody has noticed it yet. Sierra's story reminds us that talent can be ignored, that recognition can take time. But it also reminds us that it only takes one person to truly look to change everything. Because some problems aren't solved with audits, reports, or 43 seconds of typing. Some are only solved when we stop looking at numbers and start seeing people. And when that happens, the invisible finally ceases to be invisible. The end. And what about you? What rating from 0 to 10 would you give this story? Which moment moved you the most? Tell us in the comments. We love reading your thoughts. And if you like this story, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next emotional moments that are on the way. See you in the next story.